This is the story of how the most famous skateboarder alive turned his own name into a business empire worth far more than anything he ever earned from competition. Tony Hawk landed the first 900 in skateboarding history back in 1999, and that single trick made him a household name, but the trick was never the real business plan. What came after it was. Long before Hawk became a global brand, he was already thinking like one. In 1992, at the lowest financial point of his career, when skateboarding's popularity had collapsed and most of his sponsors had walked away, Hawk co-founded Birdhouse Skateboards with fellow pro Per Welander. Instead of waiting for the industry to recover, he built his own company from inside the crash, betting he understood the culture better than the corporations who just abandoned it. That bet paid off, but not in the way most people assume. Birdhouse survived the lean years, and by the time skateboarding exploded back into the mainstream in the late 90s, Hawk already owned a piece of the machine instead of just riding it. He wasn't just a face for other people's products anymore, he was an owner, and that distinction is the entire reason his career outlasted almost every skater of his generation. Then came the deal that changed everything. In 1999, the same year as the 900, Activision released Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Hawk didn't just lend his name to a logo, he was directly involved in shaping how the game felt, insisting the controls captured the actual flow of skateboarding rather than some generic extreme sports formula. The gamble worked, and it worked big. The franchise went on to sell tens of millions of copies across more than a dozen titles, introducing skateboarding to an entire generation of kids who'd never set foot on a board. The financial structure behind that deal is what separated Hawk from nearly every other athlete of his era. Instead of a flat licensing check, Hawk negotiated ongoing royalties tied to the franchise's performance, which meant every copy sold kept paying him long after the cameras stopped rolling. When Activision revived the series in 2020 with a remaster of the first two games, Hawk was right back at the center of it, not as nostalgia bait, but as an active creative partner still cashing in on a franchise generating real revenue 2 decades later. The game franchise did something else for Hawk that no contest podium ever could. It turned him into a piece of cultural infrastructure. Millions of people who never watched a single skate competition grew up learning what a kickflip or a manual was through a controller, not a board. That kind of exposure is nearly impossible to buy through traditional sponsorship, and it meant Hawk's name stayed relevant to new audiences roughly once a decade, every time a new console generation rediscovered the games. Birdhouse, meanwhile, kept growing quietly in the background. While flashier skate brands rose and collapsed around it, Birdhouse became one of the most consistently run companies in the industry, distributing boards, apparel, and hardware through a business structure stable enough that it never depended entirely on Hawk's own visibility to survive. Hawk also understood something most retired athletes miss entirely, that his personal brand was worth more diversified than concentrated. He built out the Hawk Foundation, later renamed the Skatepark Project, which has funded and helped build hundreds of public skate parks across underserved communities in the United States. It isn't a side charity tacked onto his name for good press. It functions as a core part of his public identity, reinforcing the idea that Hawk is still actively shaping skate culture rather than simply profiting from having once dominated it. Beyond skateboarding itself, Hawk expanded into real estate holdings, entertainment ventures, and a long list of licensing deals stretching from apparel to energy drinks to television appearances, treating his own name the way a media company treats a franchise, protecting it, extending it, and reinvesting in it rather than just cashing out and disappearing. He's appeared in documentaries, hosted competition broadcasts, and kept making public appearances at skate events well into his 50s, not because he needs a paycheck, but because staying visible keeps every other part of the business machine running. Each of these ventures on its own would be a modest side income for most retired athletes. Stacked together, they form something closer to a diversified portfolio, spreading Hawk's financial exposure across gaming royalties, apparel and hardware sales, real estate, media appearances, and philanthropy, so no single failing venture could ever threaten the whole structure the way a single bad sponsorship year might sink a less strategic career. What makes Hawk's business story genuinely unusual is the order he did things in. Most athletes chase endorsement money during their competitive peak and figure out ownership later, if ever. Hawk built ownership stakes during his leanest years, when skateboarding had almost no money in it at all. And that early decision is what led every later opportunity, the video game royalties, the brand deals, the foundation, compound on top of a foundation he already controlled. Today, decades after that first 900, Hawk's estimated net worth sits in the hundreds of millions, built not from a single trick or a single payday, but from a business empire assembled one calculated decision at a time. The kid who nearly lost everything when skateboarding crashed in the early 90s became the one person in the entire sport who never needed it to boom again to keep winning. That's the real trick Tony Hawk landed. Not the 900, impressive as it was, but building a business durable enough to outlast the sport's every rise and fall, including his own retirement from competition. The board is just where the story started, the empire is where it actually plays out.